What we're going to look at in this video is the second part of Single Area OSPF version 2 configuration. Now there's a lot of information in this next part. It would be an extremely in-depth, really long video if I talked about every single aspect. So what I'll probably do for a lot of this video is more or less kind of point you in the direction of some of the things you'll want to examine more closely, and that would take some in-depth reading on your part, because to be honest, I'm not sure how many of you would want to sit there through an extremely long video. OSPF is very complex. It's much more involved than, say, the RIP routing protocol. So if you were in CCNA version 1 and 2 and you learned about the RIP routing protocol, you learned that it just used hop count only, the command was route or RIP, and then your network numbers. You might have added version 2 in there, in addition to the route or RIP command. But with OSPF, you're not using just your hop counts, as I mentioned earlier. You're using bandwidth, delay, load, reliability, the timers. Everything has to match, because if you have two different interfaces that are both OSPF enabled, they both have to have the same exact metrics or they won't be able to communicate. So if one of those is off, it won't communicate. If you have a hello interval and a dead interval that are different times, they won't communicate. So we'll look at that in a few minutes. But again, I just wanted to point you to a few things in OSPF. So one of the first things we're going to look at is the cost metric. Now, there are some default Cisco OSPF costs. So you see those here. So you see the cost for Ethernet. The cost is 10, or fast Ethernet is 1. See that for gigabit Ethernet. Okay. Now you can, so these are the actual cost here. So 10 gig is 1, gigabit Ethernet is 10, fast Ethernet's 100, Ethernet 10 meg is 10, Ethernet 10 meg, I'm sorry, is 1,000. So what we're looking at here is where you had a bunch of default Cisco costs, and you had a lot of the same costs, but you notice it's a little different here. So, and that is determined based on the speed. So the cost is a lot less for your higher speeds. Now, OSPF accumulates cost. Now, when it accumulates cost, that's how it determines which route would be the best route to use, because it's going to go by the lowest cost method. Now that is the metric that is used within OSPF, because if you'll look at your routing table here, you have an O entry, which indicates OSPF. This is the destination network. This is the administrative distance. The 110 indicates that you're using OSPF, and this is the metric. So this is the metric that we're referring to. They did a show IP route 10.10.10 2.0, and you see the metric actually listed as 11. Now, if you want to manually set these, you can go into the interface itself and type the specific cost. So that's what you see here, and then they've done the show command to verify that. So if you want to see what happens if a particular link goes down, all you have to do to check what it would do is go in and shut down an interface and watch your traffic change. So be watching your traffic pattern. So your routing tables should change, because your routing tables will flush out any routes that are currently down. So you can check that in that particular exercise. Now, I mentioned hello packets earlier. By default, they're sent out every 10 seconds. Okay. Now there's a dead interval also. So the dead interval is 4 times that of a hello packet. And the dead interval is used by devices, so it assumes that if it hasn't heard from a device in 4 times, so 40 seconds. If you're using the default, it assumes that route is down. Now, can you change those? Yes. If you're going in and looking at those using your show command, so show IP OSPF interface G000, the timer intervals that are configured are hello is 10 and dead is 40. If you wanted to modify those, this is your command to do that. IP OSPF hello interval and dead interval. Remember that if you change your hello interval, you want to change your dead interval, and you want to change your dead interval to 4 times that of your hello interval. Again, if these don't match on the interfaces that are trying to communicate with each other, they won't form an adjacency to each other. So they won't be neighbors, they just won't share OSPF routing information. So all that information has to be the same. So here, IP OSPF hello interval was changed to 5, the dead interval was changed to 20. Okay, so that's where they actually did that. And you can use your syntax checker to check that. You have a packet tracer on modifying OSPF version 2, so you get to practice some of those things, the cost value and the hello timer. One of the things that I did not mention earlier was that you do need to know how the cost value is calculated for, or the bandwidth for some of your links. So make sure you pay special attention to that in this exercise here. Now, by default, a default static route that you learn how to configure in your CCNA version 2, that information is not propagated when devices share their routing information. So if you have OSPF enabled devices that share their routing table, they only share things learned about in the OSPF routing process. They won't share static routing information unless you tell the device to share that information. So there are commands that you can enter for that to be shared. So here they've gone into interface loopback 1, IP address, and they've said IP route, we've issued a default route, going out loopback 1. If you want that static routing information to be shared when OSPF 10 routing information is shared, you can enter the command default information originate, and it will share the information with other routers about that default static route. When you do that and you go in and look at the routing table on a router by issuing the show IP route command, you'll see gateway of last resort is right here. Okay, that's your default route. And then you will see an S with an asterisk. So we're looking at R1, and do you see that learned about it externally? And R3 learned out about an external route as well. You'll get a chance to do that in this packet tracer, so packet tracer 253. Now, verifying OSPF, there is a ton of show commands for verifying OSPF. If you ever get on the CCNA exam and you can't quite remember, don't panic. If you're on a lab, don't panic. You do have a question mark. So your question mark is and can be used on your CCNA certification. So if you ever get stuck, just do show IP space question mark or show IP OSPF space question mark, and you will see a lot of the show commands that are available for you to use in that particular prompt. Okay, so here's some ways you can verify your OSPF neighbor. Show IP interface brief, show IP route, show IP OSPF neighbor, show IP protocols, show IP OSPF, and show IP OSPF interface. If you're using the show IP OSPF neighbor command, you'll see each of the neighbors listed, and you'll see that these in particular are full adjacency. This gives you the particular breakdown about that. If you're using the show IP protocols command, you should see the OSPF protocol with a process ID listed, the router ID, and the routing interfaces enabled. You see that here with show IP OSPF. You can see the area, which is the backbone, it's 0. How many times the algorithm was used. You can look at the interface ID. So you see the router ID there, adjacencies and neighbors. You have a syntax checker to check that, and you do have a packet tracer to verify that. So you'll be issuing your show commands and practicing with that. You also have a packet tracer to kind of pull everything together from Module 2. You also have a lab that will do that as well. So this is a good summary here, this page 273. Make sure that you know this information. If you have any questions, let me know. You have my email address, so you're welcome to email me. If we need to set up an online meeting, we can do that too. Again, there's a lot to review in OSPF. Make sure you know how to configure the devices. Make sure you know how the designated router and the backup designated router is chosen. Make sure you know your show commands. So if you know everything specifically in those objectives that we looked at the very beginning of Module 2, I think you'll be in great shape for your module exams and for the CCNA exam.